sliding into the booth. It is so nice, she thought, to be touched. Did y'all hear that? Now Gus and Michael are having weekly lunches. Finds out that her husband is having weekly lunches with Gus. Welcome back to another episode of our book club series. So I have tried to film this episode 3 times. 3 times now this weekend. I was supposed to film it on Friday, but I literally had an allergy attack out of nowhere. And yesterday I got my period and things didn't go according to plan, but that's okay. If you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Brooke. I have different types of content on my channel. What you are watching is our book club series. We are reading The Pact by Jodi Picoult. I think we are on... I have period cramps. Just bear with me. I think we're on reading number 20. So basically we read chapters of the book together and then we discuss the characters and the drama and our theories about what we think might be going to happen. So if you enjoy books and book discussions, then stick around because you will definitely enjoy this type of content. If you want to catch up to where we're at right now in the book and the discussion, there is a playlist on my channel called Book Club The Pact. You can binge watch all of the videos and the readings in order over there if you are just dying to cringe. Or if you prefer to just watch the last 3 or so videos leading up to this one and jump in from there, you are welcome to do that as well. However you choose to catch up, we would love to have you join us. I always do a quick recap of the last few sentences that we read in the last video, just so that we're all on the same page and up to speed with what's going on right now. Other than that, today is reading 20, I believe, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's a little hot in here. You guys are gonna have to bear with me. It has been one hell of a period. Fuck. Okay. When we ended last time, Gus had just slapped Kate across the face because, so, little refresher, as we all know, Kate is Chris's little sister. It is their first Christmas without Chris because he's in jail awaiting trial for the murder of his girlfriend. And so we've got Gus and James, the parents, and then we've got Kate. And Kate, you know, was trying to have... Give me a second, I'm sorry. If you know, you know. Cramps. Just, if you know, you know. But anyways, so... Kate was trying to, have like a good day, at least on Christmas, because they've all been going through hell ever since, you know, Emily died and Chris has been basically blamed for her murder at this point in time. Anyways, and so they've all been going through hell and Kate's just like, she's 14, she's just wanting to have one good day, you know, she's just wanting to have one good day, like surely to God we can have one good day on Christmas, right, as a family. And so she wakes her parents up and she's like, you know, getting them up like, hey, you know, get up, you know, like trying to get them all excited for Christmas or whatever, and drags them downstairs and has, you know, gifts for both of them and has them open the gifts. And then she realizes that they both forgot that it's Christmas and they don't have anything for her. And she's just like, of course she's upset. She's upset. And so that's where we left off. And I'm going to read these last few sentences real quick. I know that because of what happened to Chris, you don't even know I'm around. She grabbed the earring box out of Gus's hand and threw it against the wall. What do I have to do to make you see me? She cried. Kill someone? Gus slapped Kate across the face. A heavy shock settled over the room. The only sound, the faint hiss of the lights as they glowed and faded. Kate, palm pressed to her burning cheek, whirled and ran out of the room, trembling, cradling her hand as if it did not belong to her. Gus turned to James. Do something, she begged. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded and walked out of the house. All right, so Gus just slapped the shit out of Kate, and we're moving on to the next section. Sorry, period cramps. So if I get like low or just slow for a second, just bear with me. It was one of those rare years when Christmas and Chanukah overlapped. The world was celebrating, which meant that Michael got the day off, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He had been sleeping on the couch for months now, so he did not know if Melanie had awakened yet. But he showered in the downstairs bathroom and made himself an English muffin to take in the truck. Then he drove to the cemetery to visit Emily. He parked some distance away, preferring the walk for the solitude and peace it offered. Snow crunched beneath his boots, and the wind bit at the tips of his ears. At the cemetery gates, he paused to stare up at the wide, blue bowl of sky. Emily's grave was over the top of the hill, hidden by the crest. Michael walked along, thinking about what he would say to her. He had no qualms about speaking to a grave. He talked all the time to things that conventionally were considered unable to understand. Horses, cows, cats. He puffed up the last bit of the long path to the point where he could first see the grave. There were flowers there, brittle stalks now, from the last time Michael had come, and ribbons trailing, and bits of paper bleeding into the snow. And Melanie, sitting on her bottom on the frozen ground, unwrapping gifts. "Oh, look at this," she said, when he was close enough to hear. "You're going to love it." And she draped a sapphire pendant over the dead necks of the roses Michael had left behind. Michael glanced from the glittering jewelry to the other presents, arrayed like offerings on either side of the marker. A single-cup coffee maker, a novel, several tubes of oil paint, and the expensive brushes Emily favored. "Melanie?" he said sharply. "What are you doing?" She turned slowly, dreamily. "Oh," Melanie said. "Hi." Michael felt his jaw clench. "Did you bring these things?" "Of course," Melanie said, as if he were the crazy one. "Who else?" Who are they for?" She stared at him, then raised her brows. "Why, Emily," she said. Michael knelt down beside her. "Mel," he said softly, "Emily is dead." His wife's eyes filled immediately with tears. "I know," she said thickly, "but you see, I don't see." "It's just that it's her first Chanukah away from home," Melanie said, "and I wanted... Michael pulled her into his arms before he had to watch the tears streak down her face. "I know what you wanted," he said. "I want it too." He buried his face in her hair and closed his eyes. "Will you come with me?" He felt her nod against him, her breath warm in his collar. They walked down the path of the cemetery, leaving behind the paints and the brushes, the coffee maker, and the sapphires, just in case. So sad. It's so sad. Okay, we're moving on to the next section. The Manchester airport was mobbed on Christmas Day, full of people carrying fruitcake tins and shopping bags ripping at the seams with their presents. Beside Jordan in the waiting lounge, Thomas bounced in his seat. He frowned as his son knocked the small folder with his tickets off his lap for the 1,000th time. "You sure you remember how to make the connection?" "Yeah," Thomas said. "If the stewardess doesn't take me, I ask someone else at the gate." "You don't go yourself," Jordan reiterated. "Not in New York City," they said simultaneously. Thomas's feet danced impatiently, kicking at the metal rungs of the brace of seats. "Cut that out," Jordan said. "Everyone in this row can feel it." "Dad," Thomas asked, "do you think they have snow in Paris?" "No," Jordan said. "So you'd better come back home to use those skis." In an act of outright bribery, he deliberately bought Thomas a pair of Rossignols for Christmas, giving the gift to his son before he left to join Deborah for the holiday. There had been a couple of transatlantic telephone calls, a heated exchange about whether or not Thomas was old enough to travel that far alone, and a flurry of compromise. In fact, for a few days, Jordan had refused Deborah's request. But then he awoke in the middle of the night one weekend and went into Thomas's room to watch him sleep. He found himself thinking of Dr. Feinstein's questions to Chris Hart. What is it about this that scares the hell out of you? And he realized that his answer was the same as Chris's had been. Up until this point, Thomas's whole life had been filled with Jordan. What if, when given an alternative, it didn't remain that way? He'd called Deborah the next morning and had given his blessing. Flight 1246 to New York LaGuardia Airport, now boarding at Gate 3. Thomas jumped to his feet so quickly he tripped over the carry-on bag. Whoa, hang on, Jordan said, reaching up a hand to steady him. He paused, about to lift the duffel, his eyes on his son, and Jordan realized that he would see this moment forever. One of life's gallery of pictures. Thomas with his head in profile, the soft fuzz of early adolescence on his cheeks, the concentration camp thinness of his bony arms, the flapping orange youth ticket grazing the waist of his jeans. Clearing his throat, Jordan hefted the carry-on bag. God, this is heavy, he said. What have you got in here anyway? What have you got in here anyway? Thomas grinned, his eyes dancing. Just 10 or 12 penthouses. Because y'all remember the penthouse. Just 10 or 12 penthouses, he said. Why? It had still been a sore point, something they did not talk about, but rubbed sharply against every now and then when passing too close to the refrigerator or sidling out of the bathroom. With relief, Jordan felt the tension of the past week dissolve. Get out of here, he said, and embraced his son. Thomas hugged him back hard. Give Mom a kiss for me, Jordan said. The boy drew back. On the cheek or on the lips? The cheek, Jordan said, and gently pushed Thomas toward the boarding ramp. He took a deep breath then and walked toward the plate glass windows parallel with the belly of the plane. He would wait, he thought, just in case Thomas changed his mind at the last minute. With his hands in his pockets, Jordan stood sentry, watching the jet taxi to the runway and lift on the wind until it disappeared from his range of vision. So, Jordan, Chris's attorney, is sending his, I don't remember how old his son is, but Thomas, I think, is like a preteen or something like that. So, he's sending Thomas, his son, to Paris to go visit his mom. I guess she lives in Paris. He's never really, I don't know that they've been that far away from each other for like that length of time, because obviously Thomas lives with his dad, Jordan. So Jordan's feeling a little bit insecure about him going to visit his mom in Paris, because it's like, for one, it's Paris, and for two, it's the other parent, so there's that competition of, well, what if he likes staying with her, the other parent, more than he likes being with me, So Jordan's just having these like insecure thoughts, but I think he's realizing he has to give his son the space to come back to him. He's just realizing that he has to let his son go and allow his son to want to come back to him. Next section. Merry Christmas, the officer said, grating open the door of the isolation cell. Chris sat up, uncurling from the floor. The Bible had fallen beneath the bunk. He quickly slipped it into the waistband of his pants. Yeah, he murmured, rocking back on his heels. The officer grunted at him. You want to wait till New Year's? Chris blinked. You mean that's it? I'm out? Superintendent's feeling charitable today, the officer said, holding the door open so that Chris could pass through. He walked swiftly down the corridor, stopping at the control room. Where now? Go directly to jail, the officer said, laughing at his own joke. That's so cruel. So, last reading, basically Chris got put in the isolation cell because he got into a fight with one of the other inmates. what's the guy's name? Hector, the bully. He got into a fight with Hector, the bully, and he ended up in the isolation cell, or the, what do they call it? Solitary confinement cell. So they're letting him out because they're feeling charitable because it's Christmas or whatever. And the guy, person, whatever the fuck they're called, the jail guard that's like taking him back to his regular cell. It's like, because Chris is asking him, like, because he's directing him through the jail, right? And Chris is like, stops, and he's like, okay, where are we going now? And the jail guard is like, go directly to jail. And then laughs at his own stupid ass joke. That's so cruel. All right, anyways. The officer said, laughing at his own joke, I meant which security level. Usually you go back to max, the officer said. But seeing as how your cellmate said you were provoked, and how you didn't have a DR before you went to the hole, we're putting you back in medium. He opened the door for Chris. Oh yeah, he added, your buddy Hector's back downstairs. In maximum? The officer nodded, and Chris briefly closed his eyes. He's like, thank God, I don't have to deal with this asshole for a while. Steve was reading in the cell when Chris came in. He slid into his bunk and tried to bury himself under the pillow, smelling that horrible gel smell in the detergent, but luxuriating in the very fact of a pillow. He could feel Steve's gaze on him, even through all these layers, deciding whether or not he should speak. Finally, because it was coming sooner or later, Chris took the pillow off his face. Hey, Steve said. Merry Christmas. Same to you, Chris answered. You all right? Chris shrugged. Thanks for telling them about Hector. He meant it. Hector was not one to forgive someone for ratting on him. It was nothing, he said. Well, thanks anyway. Steve looked away, picking at a nubby pill on the worn sleeve of his shirt. I've got something for you, he said casually, for Christmas. Horrified, Chris panicked. He'd never thought about giving gifts in here. For God's sake. I don't have anything for you, he said. As a matter of fact. Why did my light just go off? Excuse me. Hello? Can you come back on, please? Thank you. Rude. As a matter of fact, Steve said, reaching beneath his bunk, you do. He extracted a nasty-looking instrument, fashioned out of the shaft of a big pen and a long, lethal-looking needle. Tattoos, he whispered. Chris wanted to ask how he'd gotten the needle. He could not imagine any weekender sticking that up his ass. But he knew. So when he says this, any weekender sticking that up his ass, he means like somebody sneaking that into the jail. By any weekender, he just means like somebody that got arrested over the weekend and is going to get bailed out like in a couple days. Basically somebody that's just going to be there for a short period of time that snuck in whatever this is. Is it a needle? Who the hell would put it? Yeah, exactly. Nobody would put a needle up their ass to sneak it in jail is basically what he's saying. He could not imagine any weekender sticking that up his ass. But he knew that if he was going to do this, he didn't have time. Jail tattoos and the items used to create them were illegal. Having one right out in the open raised you a notch in respect because you were flaunting your trespasses right under the officers' noses. So he means respect like with the other inmates, basically. Respect among the other inmates. You have this jail tattoo showing you were somehow able to get a hold of these items and get yourself this jail tattoo right under the guards' noses. So that's what he means, like, it earns you respect, a notch in respect with the other inmates. Having one right out in the open raised you a notch in respect because you were flaunting your trespasses right under the officers' noses. What Steve was really giving him for Christmas was a way to save face. So that's what he means, to save face, basically, with the other inmates. Because, again, the man that Hector, the one that Chris got into a jail fight with, was kind of like the bully, or kind of like the unelected president of their jail pod. And so he's the one that Chris got into a fight with. So Chris kind of has to, like, basically Hector had the respect of everyone in their little jail pod. And so now his roommate Steve is helping him earn that respect that he may have lost from the others for getting into this fight with Hector, basically. So he's like, what Steve was really giving him for Christmas was a way to save face. He held out his arm, unsure if he really wanted to do this, but clear-headed enough to realize that if he wanted to escape AIDS, he'd damn well better go first. With a quick glance toward the officer making rounds, Steve took out a lighter, another contraband surprise, and held the needle over the flame. Chris rested his elbow on his knee and felt the first searing burn of flesh. It smelled oddly sweet, like roasting meat, and it sent pain straight down to his groin. Clenching his fist, he watched his own blood run down his bicep as Steve heated, carved, and cut. Then he felt Steve squirt the ink cartridge from the Bic into the wound, rubbing it into the raw skin where it would permanently set. You can't see till you wash it off good. Okay. So he's saying you can't see the tattoo until you wash it off good. Steve said, but it's an 8-ball. He looked up at Chris, his eyes clear and sharp, because we both seemed to be stuck behind it. The 8-ball. Chris pulled his sleeve down as far as it would go, licking at his fingers to rub off the residue of blood and ink. An officer drifted by the cell, and Steve pressed the lighter into his hand. Do one for me, he said. Please. Chris's hands shook as he cauterized the needle and pressed it against Steve's upper arm. Steve jerked, then tightened his muscles. Chris drew the circle, the figure 8, and the black background. Then he rubbed ink into the cuts and quickly pressed the needle back into Steve's hands. Their fingers brushed. Is it true? Steve asked without glancing up. About the baby? Chris thought of Jordan, who had told him not to say a word to anyone. He thought of these matching tattoos, branding them 2 of a kind. And he thought of the words he'd read last night in the filth of the isolation cell. Listen to my voice, and I shall be your God, and you shall be my people. Chris stared at his friend, his confidant, his congregation. Yes, he said. I'm trying to remember what he's asking him about the baby. Okay, so I guess somehow Steve and everybody else, oh, that's right, because Hector was talking shit. Okay, so Hector and Steve and everybody in the jail, in their little jail pod, because people talk, people gossip and shit. Basically all the inmates, have now found out that Emily, Chris's dead girlfriend, was pregnant when she died. And so now everybody thinks that Chris killed her. The story goes that Chris murdered her because he didn't want the baby. And that's like all these people talking shit. When in reality, we have learned that Chris did not know about the baby. He did not know that she was pregnant. So that's not true. But all these inmates are talking shit and people are gossiping, basically. And so when Steve asks him, is it true about the baby? He's saying, like, is it true that she was pregnant? Like, you were going to have a baby, is what he's saying. And Chris stared at his friend, his confidant, his congregation. Yes, he said. Okay, and then now we're moving on to the next section. Michael stood up, as was his custom now, and watched Chris leave the basement of the jail. Today, he had not been planning to come. But seeing Melanie at the gravesite had unnerved him, and he wanted to tell someone about it. In the end, he hadn't told Chris. It didn't seem quite right, after all, but something about being here on Christmas Day eased his conscience. If he had not had the chance to speak to Emily that morning, at least he could talk to Chris this afternoon. He wished the officer a happy holiday and jogged up the stairwell to the control room. It was the only way out of the jail. You were locked inside to visit with an inmate. He stood patiently behind a woman in a camel's hair coat, her hair concealed by a fluffy mohair cap. Yes, she said to the officer, I'm here to visit Chris Hart. Popular guy, the officer said. He bellowed over the loudspeaker. Heart to control. Michael felt his heart squeeze under his ribs. Gus, he said, his mouth dry. So, Michael has been going to visit Chris in jail. Michael, Emily's father, the dead girl's father, has been going to visit her boyfriend, in jail. And now he runs into Gus, Chris's mom, who also obviously goes to visit Chris in jail on a regular basis. And so this is their first time running into each other and like finding out, for Gus's first time finding out that Michael, the father of her son's dead girlfriend, is going to visit Chris, the suspect, her son, in jail. So it's a little odd. Michael felt his heart squeeze under his ribs. "Gus," he said, his mouth dry. She whirled, her cap tumbling off, and her bright fall of hair spilling over the lapels of her coat. "Michael," she gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Apparently," he said, smiling wryly, "the same thing as you." Her mouth worked for a moment without making a sound. You visit Chris?" Michael nodded. "I have been," he admitted, "recently." They stared for a moment. "How are you?" Gus asked. At the same moment, Michael said, "How has this been?" And shaking their heads, they both smiled. A bright blush stained Gus's cheeks, and she glanced toward the staircase. "I better go," she said. "Merry Christmas," Michael answered. "You too." "Oh." "You too. Oh, it's okay. Happy Chanukah." "That too," Michael smiled. Gus put her hand on the doorframe of the staircase, but did not move into it. Do you, would you maybe want to get a cup of coffee afterward?" She smiled, her whole face lighting. "I'd like that," she said. But Chris..." "I know. I'll wait," Michael said. He leaned against the wall and folded his coat over his arms. "I've got all the time in the world." So, yeah, I don't remember exactly what happened previously, but basically we've been getting this sense that there's some romantic tension between Gus and Michael. So, and this is not good. This is terrible. This is bad because Melanie, the dead girl's mom, Melanie, who is Michael's wife, already hates Gus. And they used to be best friends. Let's pause here for a second. Let me just sit this down so I can think. All right. So Melanie and Michael are married, right? Their daughter, Emily, is dead. And Chris, her boyfriend, is the suspect, the murder suspect. Okay? Gus is Chris's mom. Gus and James are Chris's parents, who Chris is in jail awaiting trial. So there's been like this building sexual / romantic tension between Gus and Michael. It's kind of been suggesting that I don't remember exactly what happened. Somebody that's watching this, go back through the videos and find where it talks about, like where it starts hinting that Gus and Michael might be kind of like into each other. Go back, our investigative type here in our book club series. Go back for us, find what's going down, and put it in the comments so that you can remind us all like how this whole little thing started. Okay, but anyways, yeah, so this is really bad. Back to what I was going to say. Sorry, I forgot. So right now at this point in time, Melanie hates Gus because obviously, just like everybody else does, Melanie thinks that Chris, Gus's son, is the one who murdered her daughter. So she doesn't want anything to do with that family, who previously to this, they were all best friends. Like, Gus and Melanie have been best friends. They're like their children's whole lives, they've been best friends. They raised them together. They were pregnant together, like besties for the resties. Okay, Gus and Melanie. And then, like the whole family was just, they did everything together. And so now, after all this shit has gone down, basically Gus and Melanie no longer have a friendship. Gus feels like she has lost her best friend, Melanie, and Melanie wants absolutely nothing to do with her or that family in general. She hates them. And this is really bad. This whole situation is really bad because, like, not only does Melanie already hate Gus, but, like, now there's this weird thing, we don't know yet what, going on between Gus and Michael, who is Melanie's husband. Like, that's your ex-best friend's husband, who you already, like, it's not good. It's getting bad. I don't know where this is going. What do y'all think? What do y'all think? Are you picking up on this too? Because I don't think it's just me. I think it's pretty obvious that there's some romantic energy going on between Gus and Michael, and I think it's leading somewhere. What do you guys think? Put it in the comments. Okay. Anyways, so he said, so Michael's like, I'll wait for you. He's like, so Gus is about to go in and visit Chris, and Michael's on his way out from visiting Chris at the jail. And he's like, he asks her, do you want to have coffee? And she's like, yeah, I do, but I'm going to visit Chris. And he's like, I'll wait. I got all the time in the world. So Michael is now waiting for Gus while she's going to visit her son in jail. I've got all the time in the world. All right, now we're moving on to the next section. This is called Part 3. Part 3, The Truth. It says, and ever has it been that love knows not its own depth until the hour of separation. Khalil Gibran, the prophet. And then there's another quote on here at the beginning of Part 3 that says, that a lie which is half a truth is ever the blackest of lies. That a lie which is all a lie may be met and fought with outright. But a lie which is part a truth is harder a matter to fight. Alfred Lord Tennyson, The Grandmother. Okay, so now we're back to now. It says February 1998. All in all, the Honorable Leslie F. Puckett was not a bad draw for a trial judge. 3 times in the past, as both prosecutor and defense attorney, Jordan had been involved in cases over which Puckett presided. Rumor had it that his severe approach and razor-sharp critiques of trial attorneys were grounded in his own insecurity about his given name, Leslie not being as masculine as he would have liked. But he dispensed barbs to both prosecution and defense with equanimity. That aside, the only caveat to a case with Judge Puckett was his affinity for almonds, which he kept in glass jars on his desk in both the courtroom and chambers, and cracked open loudly with his teeth. Pre-trial hearings were usually held in open court, but the severity of Chris's charge and the publicity it had attracted led everyone involved to believe the meeting was best conducted in the judge's chambers. Puckett, black robes fluttering around his ankles, strode into the room with Jordan and Barry Delaney hurrying in his wake. All 3 sat down, and Puckett slid an almond out of the glass jar and popped it into his mouth. At the hideous crunch, Jordan looked at Barry. Although attorneys were extremely formal in the courtroom, even the most cutthroat prosecutors and defense lawyers let their guard down outside. Jordan, as a former prosecutor, maintained a decent rapport with most of the assistant attorney generals. Barry Delaney was another story. He'd never worked with her. She'd arrived at the AG's office after he'd left, with fists swinging, and she seemed to take it personally that Jordan had defected to the other side of the law. Hell, she seemed to take everything personally. She was sitting like a convent schoolgirl, hands folded, black skirt tucked around her legs, and a glazed smile over her face, even as Leslie Puckett spit out the almond shell into his palm. The judge shuffled papers on his desk. Jordan coughed to attract the prosecutor's attention. Nice police work, Delaney, he said under his breath. Nothing like a little coercion for my client. Coercion? She hissed at Jordan. He wasn't even a suspect when he was in the hospital. That interview was totally above board, and you know it. If it's totally above board, how'd you know I was talking about that interview? McAfee, the judge said, and Delaney. You two about finished? The attorneys turned toward the desk. Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Good, he said sourly. Now what needs to be docketed? Well, Your Honor, Barry jumped in. We have a specialist looking at the blood spatters who needs some time. Plus the DNA testing we're doing is backed up at the lab. She consulted her Filofax. We'll be ready by the 1st of May. Anything you're planning to hand in? Yes, Your Honor. Several motions in Limeline dealing with the defendant's so-called expert witness and other objectionable evidence. The judge plucked another almond from his jar and rolled it around on his tongue, turning to Jordan. How about you? A motion to suppress an interview that was done in the hospital with my client, which clearly violated his Miranda rights. That's bullshit, Barry cried. He could have walked away at any time. Jordan bared his teeth in a semblance of a smile. Blatantly illegal, he said. My client didn't feel much like walking away when he just suffered 70 stitches to close a scalp wound and was under the influence of various painkillers, and your detective damn well knew that. Keep this up, the judge said, and I won't have to read the motion. Jordan faced Puckett again. I can have it for you in a week, which I'll gladly respond to, Barry added. Waste of your time, Barry, Jordan murmured, not to mention my clients. You... Counselors, Jordan cleared his throat. My apologies, Your Honor. Miss Delaney gets my dander up. I've never heard that one before. Gets my dander up. Okay. So I see, Puckett said. You'll both have these motions to me by the end of next week? Not a problem, Jordan said. Yes, Barry nodded. All right then, Puckett said, spreading his hands over his calendar as if to divine a date. Let's start jury selection on May 7th. Jordan gathered up his briefcase and watched Barry Delaney collect her files. He remembered that from being a prosecutor, the incredible number of files, with too little time to do justice to each case. For Chris Hart's sake, he hoped this was still true. Out of long habit, he hoped this still held true. Out of long habit, he held the door to chambers open for Miss Delaney, although he personally rated her more on a par with a pit bull than a member of the fair sex. They walked down the hall of the courthouse, both furious and silent and filled with visions of winning. Then Barry turned toward Jordan, blocking his progress. If you want a plea, she said flatly, we're offering manslaughter. Jordan crossed his arms. 30 to life, Barry added. When Jordan didn't even blink, Barry shook her head slowly. Look, Jordan, she said, he's going down no matter what. You and I both know. I've got the case locked up. You've seen the hard evidence, the fingerprints, the bullet, the trajectory through the head, and you and I both know she couldn't have shot herself like that. A jury isn't going to get far enough past those facts to even pay attention to whatever you're going to throw at them for a diversion. Let's do that again. A jury isn't going to get far enough past those facts to even pay attention to whatever you're going to throw at them for a diversion. If you take 30 years, at least he'll be out before he's 50. Jordan waited a moment and then uncrossed his arms. Are you finished? Yes. Good. He started to walk down the hall again. Barry ran after him. So? Jordan stopped. So, the only reason I'm even going to tell my client about that ridiculous heap of shit you just produced as an officer, about that ridiculous heap of shit you just produced as an offer, is because I'm obligated to. He stared at Barry, a hint of a smile on his face. I've been around a lot longer than you have, he said. In fact, I used to be on your side. I used to play the game the same exact way you are now, which means that I also know you aren't nearly as convinced of a conviction as you say you are. He inclined his head briefly. I'll talk to my client, he said, but all the same, we'll be seeing you in court. Next section. So Barry Delaney is the Assistant Attorney General, who is prosecuting Chris, his client. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next section then. When Jordan finished talking, Chris drummed his fingers on the table. 30 years, he said, his voice breaking in spite of his tight rein of control. He looked up at his attorney. How old are you? 38, Jordan said, knowing exactly where this was leading. That's like your whole life, Chris said, and twice mine. Still, Jordan pointed out, it's about half a true life sentence, and there's parole. Chris stood and walked to the window. What should I do? He said softly. I can't tell you, Jordan said. I said there were 3 things you needed to decide by yourself. Whether or not to go to trial is one of them. Chris turned slowly. If you were 18, if you were me, what would you do? A grin crept across Jordan's face. Do I have the same kick-ass lawyer? Sure, Chris laughed. Be my guest. Jordan stood too, and settled his hands in his pockets. I'm not going to tell you winning is a sure thing, because it's not. But I'm not going to tell you we're flat out going to lose either. I can tell you, though, that if you take the plea bargain, you're going to spend 30 years wondering whether or not we could have beaten them. Chris nodded, but did not say anything, staring out at the vista of snow outside the jail. You don't have to decide now, Jordan said. Think it over. Chris splayed his hand on the cold glass, making a ghost of a shadow. When is the trial supposed to start? May 7th, Jordan said. Jury selection. Chris's shoulders began to shake, and Jordan moved toward him, alarmed that the thought of being incarcerated for 3 more months had set Chris over the edge. But when he touched his client's shoulder, he realized Chris was laughing. Are you superstitious? Chris said, wiping at his eyes. Why? May 7th is Emily's birthday. You're kidding, Jordan said, slack-jawed. He tried to imagine what Barry Delaney would do when she pieced together that information. Probably wheel in a fucking ice cream cake for the jury to enjoy during her opening argument. He frantically tried to think of a motion he could file or a witness he could detain in order to request a continuance. He tried to evaluate how much of a bleeding heart Puckett could be. Do it, Chris said, so softly that Jordan did not hear him at first. What? The plea bargain. Chris's lips twitched. Chris's lips twitched. Tell them to go to hell. So he's not taking the plea bargain. And apparently, the jury selection for the trial is supposed to start on Emily's birthday. Okay, next section. There was no written rule that said Gus and Michael had to keep their weekly lunches secret. So now Gus and Michael are having weekly lunches. Did y'all hear that? Now Gus and Michael are having weekly lunches. Some fucked up shit. I don't know, man. I just feel like shit's about to get crazy. Like, if Melanie finds out about that, can y'all imagine? Can we just pause here for a second? If Melanie finds out, who already hates Gus now, who already can't stand Gus, and, like, is just so broken right now, finds out that her husband is having weekly lunches with Gus. Y'all. All right, I'm just gonna keep reading. There was no written rule that said Gus and Michael had to keep their weekly lunches secret, hoarded like a smile at a funeral, but they did this all the same, furtively slipping inside the delicatessen as if they'd crossed enemy lines. Hold on, we're gonna redo that. Furtively slipping inside the delicatessen as if they'd crossed enemy lines. In a way, it was like that, a battle, and they might have as well been spies, taking comfort from someone who had every reason to betray you the minute you turned your back. But in another, very elemental way, they might have been each other's lifeline. Hi, Gus said breathlessly, sliding into the booth. She smiled at Michael, who was flicking the laminated menu with his thumbnail. How is he today? He's okay, Michael said. Looking forward to seeing you, I think. So they're like taking turns, because they were already going to visit Chris in jail. But now they're like, I guess they're meeting up every time they go visit Chris in jail. And they're having lunch in between. So like Michael has gone first, and now they're having lunch. And I guess Gus is going after this to visit her son, Chris, in jail. So they're like taking turns. He's okay, Michael said. Looking forward to seeing you, I think. Is he still sick? Gus asked. Is he still sick? Gus asked. Last week he had that horrible cough. It's much better, Michael assured her. He got some Robitussin from the commissary. The commissary, if you don't know, in jail is like where you can order food, you can order medicine, you can order like, I think, like anything, like any kind of like, I think you can order like pencils and notebooks and like extra, I don't know, extra stuff that you might need. But yeah, basically commissary is where people in jail can order, like, so you get money put on your books is what they call it. So like a family member or anybody that's out can send you money and send you money to put on your books. And then with that, you can buy extra stuff from commissary. So like snacks, anything that like pens, you know, notepads and stuff like that. I'm trying to think like what else, like coffee, if you want coffee, stuff like that. So anyway, so it says, where were we at? He got some Robitussin from the commissary. Gus settled her napkin on her lap, a thrill running through her chest and shoulders at the sight of him. Like a schoolgirl with a crush. She had known Michael for 20 years, but was only beginning to really see him, as if this situation had not only changed her perception of her world, but also the people who inhabited it. How had she never noticed that Michael's voice could soothe so easily, that his hands seemed so strong, his eyes kind, that he listened to her as if she were the only person in the room? Gus was guiltily aware of the fact that the conversation she was having with this man was the very conversation she should have been having with her husband. James still refused to talk about his son, as if Chris's name and the accusations against him were a great black bat, which once freed would spread its wings and shriek and refuse to go back from where it had come. Because remember, so for those that don't know, James is Chris's dad, aka Gus's husband, and he like is just kind of putting himself out of this whole jail situation. He doesn't want the bad publicity, basically, to mess with his career. So he's just kind of avoiding the whole thing. Like, doesn't visit his son in jail, not doing a goddamn thing to like help anybody get through this shit. Basically, he's just acting like it's not happening. He's just MIA. Okay, so anyways, James still refused to talk about his son as if Chris's name and the accusations against him were a great black bat, which once freed would spread its wings and shriek and refuse to go back from where it had come. She had begun to eagerly look forward to these weekly lunches, arranged around the visiting hours of the Grafton jail, because she'd have someone to speak to. That it was Michael was sometimes odd. Since his wife had been Gus's best friend for, well, nearly forever, they knew a great deal about each other, secondhand. There were things that Melanie had told Gus about Michael, and things Melanie had told Michael about Gus. It made them uncomfortably intimate, brimming with knowledge of each other that they otherwise should not have had. "You look very nice today," Michael said. Me? Gus laughed. "Well, thank you. So do you." She meant it. Michael's flannel shirts and faded jeans, chosen because of his messy profession, made Gus think of soft, overstuffed words like comfort and nestle and snug. "You dress up for your visits, don't you?" "I suppose I do," Gus said. She glanced down at her printed dress and smiled. "I wonder who I'm trying to impress." "Chris," Michael answered for her. "It's how you want him to remember you, in between." And how would you know that?" Gus teased. "Because I do the same thing when I go to Emily's grave," he said. "Jacket and tie. Can you imagine me in that? Just in case she's looking." It's so sweet. Stricken, Gus lifted her face. "Oh, Michael," she said. "I forget sometimes that this is so much worse for you." "I don't know," Michael said. "At least it's over for me. For you, it's just beginning." Gus ran her finger along the edge of her saucer. How come I remember the two of them catching frogs and playing tag like it was yesterday? Because it was, Michael answered quietly. It wasn't all that long ago. He glanced around the little deli. I don't know how we got here, he said. Those days are so clear to me I can smell the grass I just mowed and see the pine tar streaking the back of Emily's legs. And then, bam, I'm visiting my daughter's grave and Chris is in jail. Gus closed her eyes. It was so easy then. It never crossed my mind that something like this would happen. That's because it's not supposed to happen to people like us. But it has. It is. How come? He shook his head. I don't know. I keep asking myself that, thinking back. I figure it's like a root sticking out that I happened to miss the first time around and can't help tripping over now. He stared at Gus. Kids like Emily and Chris don't just decide to kill themselves, do they? Gus twisted her napkin. In spite of her newfound closeness to Michael, she had not confided that Chris had never been suicidal. So, we found out, we're going to pause here for a second, we found out in a previous reading that, so the whole story, the whole premise of Chris's story is that, he and Emily had this pact, this suicide, oh fuck, I'm going to have to edit that out, this suicide pact that they were going to, together, they were going to kill themselves together. And so the whole story then for him, like his whole defense is that it was just a double suicide gone wrong. That basically Emily had already offed herself before the cops arrived, but that Chris didn't have time before the cops arrived to save them to off himself as well. And so that it was just a double suicide gone wrong. That's like the whole story. Well, what we found out in a previous reading was that Chris was actually not ever suicidal. Like, he didn't ever plan on doing that to himself, which is actually, like, it just kind of blows up the whole thing, right? Because why would he have even gone there with her that day in the first place and taken the gun with them if he had never planned on offing himself, right? So, but no one knows that except Gus, Chris's mom, Chris, and his lawyer at this point. So I assume it's going to come out. What do y'all think? When do y'all think this is going to come out? I think it's going to come out in the trial somehow, and it's going to be like, some shit's going to blow up, basically. Anyways, so, in spite of her newfound closeness to Michael, she had not confided that Chris had never been suicidal. In part, this was because she didn't want to betray her son's defense. And in part, because it would only reopen the healing, because it would only reopen the healing wound in Michael's heart. Do you remember, she said, trying to change the direction of the conversation, how Emily used to scream when they played tag? Chris would chase her and she'd shriek so loud that you'd come running from your house and I'd come running from mine. A smile wreathed Michael's face. Yeah, he said. She made it sound like he was killing her. As soon as the words were out, Gus's eyes flew to his. I'm sorry, he said, paling. I didn't mean it like that. I know. Really. It's okay, Gus said. I understand. Michael cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. All right, then. What are we having? The usual, Gus said, brightening. I still can't get over the fact that I found New York-style pastrami in Grafton County, New Hampshire. Every cloud has a silver lining, Michael said, waving over the waitress. They ordered, and then settled into conversation, steering clear of the landmine topics that had been laid down by unspoken agreement. Melanie, James, and what they had all once been together. Let me just read that sentence again, because I feel like we need to read that again. They ordered and then settled into conversation, steering clear of the landmine topics that had been laid down by unspoken agreement. Melanie, James, and what they had all once been to each other. Interestingly enough, one sanctioned topic was the upcoming trial. With Chris as a common link, they discussed the fact that Jordan wanted Michael to testify for the defense, and Michael's natural reservations. I don't know why I'm asking your advice, Michael said. You aren't exactly nonpartisan. I'm shamelessly biased, Gus admitted. But you have to imagine what a jury would think, even if you barely said a word, just seeing you up on the stand on Chris's behalf. Michael set down his corned beef. That's exactly what I imagined. That's exactly what I imagined, he said softly. I think, what kind of a father am I? He drummed the fingers of his right hand on the table. As much as I love Chris, could I do that to Emily? Emily wouldn't want Chris to be convicted of a murder he didn't commit. Emily wouldn't want Chris to be convicted of a murder he didn't commit, Gus said firmly. Michael smirked. Ah, so that's why you come to lunch with me. You're the secret weapon in McAfee's arsenal. Gus's face drained of color. The secret weapon in Jordan's arsenal was that he would be lying, making the jury believe that Chris had wanted to kill himself too, just as she was currently allowing Michael to believe it. She settled her napkin over her unfinished lunch and reached in the far corner of the booth for her coat. I ought to go. So now she's feeling like this cognitive dissonance about knowing that basically Jordan, the attorney, her son's attorney, is going to be lying, saying that Chris was or did want to kill himself also. So she's like feeling super uncomfortable, like, I gotta go. Peace, gotta go. Anyway, so I ought to go, she muttered, fumbling open her purse to leave her share of the bill. Damn thing, she said, her fingers slipping on the catch. Hey, Michael said. Gus. He reached across the table to where Gus's fingers were furiously knotted over the clasp and settled his hand on hers. Gus stilled. It is so nice, she thought, to be touched. What's about to go down? Two bright flags of color rode high on Michael's cheekbones. I didn't mean it, he said. About you working for the lawyer. I know, she managed. Then why are you rushing off all of a sudden? 'Cause she feels guilty, bro. Oof. This shit's getting heavy. This is getting getting tangled. This is getting very tangled. Then why are you rushing off all of a sudden? Gus looked at the edge of her plate. I don't tell James that I'm meeting you for lunch. Do you tell Melanie? No, Michael admitted. I don't. Why do you think that is? I don't know, Michael said. Gus gently pulled her hand away from his. Neither do I. Yes, you do. Y'all know exactly why the fuck. Because it's a bad idea, that's why. That's why you're not telling them. Because it's an actually horrible idea. What do you guys think? What are your theories? Who are your favorite characters? Who do you relate to? What the fuck do you think's about to go down? Put it in the comments. Now, I'm going to end reading 20 right there. I love you guys so much for listening, and I love that you all enjoy this just as much as I do. Don't forget to leave a comment, and I will see you next time. I love you so much. Bye!
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.